In the shadows of Madrid's underbelly during the late 1980s and early 1990s, a sinister presence stalked the city's homeless population. Francisco Garcia Escalero, known as El Matamendigos, the killer of Beggars, would emerge as one of Spain's most notorious serial killers, his acts of necrophilia and cannibalism shocking a nation and leaving an indelible mark on Spanish criminal history. Born in Madrid in 1954, Escalero's early life was marked by severe psychological disturbances that would later manifest in the most horrific ways imaginable. From childhood, he exhibited troubling behavior that went beyond typical childhood mischief. His family, struggling with poverty and their own challenges, failed to recognize or address the growing darkness within him. The seeds of his future crimes were planted early. By age 11, Escalero had already begun to display an unhealthy fascination with death and violence. He would often torture small animals, a behavior that criminologists universally recognize as a warning sign of future violence against humans. But in the Madrid of the 1960s, such behavior was often dismissed or overlooked, allowing his violent tendencies to fester and grow unchecked. Escalero's descent into madness accelerated during his teenage years. He began experiencing vivid hallucinations and claimed to hear voices commanding him to commit violent acts. These psychotic episodes, combined with heavy alcohol consumption and drug use, created a perfect storm of violence waiting to erupt. Despite several encounters with mental health professionals, he never received the sustained treatment his condition demanded. The 1980s marked the beginning of Escalero's killing spree, though the true start date remains uncertain due to the transient nature of his victims. He primarily targeted Madrid's homeless population, a vulnerable group whose disappearances often went unreported or uninvestigated. His first confirmed kill occurred in 1987, but investigators would later suspect his trail of violence began much earlier. Escalero's method of killing was as brutal as it was variable. He would often approach his victims in the dead of night, when they were sleeping in abandoned buildings or tucked away in the city's darker corners. Sometimes he would engage them in conversation, sharing drinks before unleashing his violence. Other times he would attack without warning, using whatever weapons were at hand: rocks, bottles, or his bare hands. What set Escalero apart from other serial killers was not just the brutality of his murders, but what he did afterward. He engaged in necrophilic acts with his victims' bodies and, in several cases, consumed parts of them. These acts of cannibalism weren't merely impulse-driven, they were part of what he described as ritualistic behavior, driven by his delusional belief system. The killer's hunting ground centered around Madrid's Retiro district and the city's southern neighborhoods, areas known for their homeless populations. He knew these streets intimately, having spent much of his own life living on them. This knowledge allowed him to move undetected, blending in with the very population he preyed upon. One of his most shocking murders occurred in 1988, when he killed Juan Andrés Rodriguez, a homeless man he had befriended. After beating him to death with a rock, Escalero engaged in necrophilic acts with the corpse and then proceeded to remove and eat parts of the victim's body. He would later tell investigators that he believed consuming his victims gave him special powers and allowed him to absorb their souls. The investigation into Escalero's crimes was complicated by several factors. The transient nature of his victims made it difficult to establish exact numbers or identities. Many of the homeless people he killed had no family to report them missing, no fixed address to trace them to, and few people to notice their absence. This allowed him to continue his killing spree virtually undetected for years. The breakthrough in the case came in 1994 when Escalero, in a state of drug-induced psychosis, confessed to his crimes at a Madrid police station. His confession was initially met with skepticism until he began leading investigators to locations where they found evidence corroborating his gruesome tales. The details he provided were too specific and numerous to be the product of mere delusion. During his interrogation, Escalero displayed an unsettling ability to recall precise details of his crimes while seemingly remaining emotionally detached from their horror. He spoke of his murders as if describing mundane daily activities, a characteristic that disturbed even seasoned investigators. His matter-of-fact descriptions of necrophilia and cannibalism left hardened detectives struggling to maintain their professional composure. As investigators dug deeper into Escalero's life and crimes, They uncovered a pattern of institutional failures that had allowed him to continue killing. Despite numerous encounters with law enforcement and mental health services over the years, the system had repeatedly failed to recognize the danger he posed or to provide the intervention needed to prevent his crimes. The trial of Francisco Garcia Escalero became one of Spain's most sensational criminal cases of the 1990s. His courtroom appearances were marked by erratic behavior and bizarre statements. He would sometimes appear lucid and cooperative, other times descending into rambling monologues about demons and supernatural forces that he claimed drove his actions. Psychiatric evaluations during the trial revealed the full extent of Escalero's mental illness. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia and various personality disorders, but debates raged about his legal sanity and capacity to stand trial. His ability to plan his crimes and avoid detection suggested a level of organization that seemed at odds with his claimed psychotic state. The court proceedings revealed that Escalero had claimed 11 victims, though investigators suspected the true number was higher. His victims included both men and women, all from society's margins: homeless individuals, drug addicts, and others whose disappearances might go unnoticed. The trial exposed not only the horror of his crimes, but also society's failure to protect its most vulnerable members. The Spanish media dubbed him El Matamendigos, a name that would become synonymous with the darker side of Madrid's street life. His case sparked discussions about mental health care, homelessness, and the treatment of society's most marginalized members. It forced the public to confront uncomfortable questions about how such crimes could go undetected for so long. In 1995, Escalero was declared criminally insane and sentenced to indefinite confinement in a psychiatric facility. The court recognized both the severity of his crimes and his severe mental illness, deciding that treatment, rather than traditional incarceration, was the appropriate response to his case. The aftermath of Escalero's crimes led to significant changes in how Madrid's law enforcement approached crimes against the homeless population. New protocols were established for investigating disappearances of transient individuals, and greater resources were allocated to protecting vulnerable street populations. The case also highlighted the need for better mental health services and intervention programs. Escalero's history of untreated mental illness and substance abuse became a cautionary tale about the potential consequences of failing to address severe psychological disorders before they escalate into violence. Today, the case of Francisco Garcia Escalero serves as a dark chapter in Spanish criminal history, one that continues to influence discussions about mental health, homelessness, and criminal justice. His crimes exposed societal blind spots and systemic failures that allowed a killer to operate undetected among society's most vulnerable members. The story of El Matamendigos remains a sobering reminder of the importance of protecting society's marginalized populations and the need for comprehensive mental health care. It stands as a testament to the potential consequences of ignoring warning signs and failing to provide adequate support for those suffering from severe mental illness. In the annals of true crime, Francisco Garcia Escalero's case stands out not only for its brutality but for what it reveals about society's treatment of its most vulnerable members. His crimes, while horrific, forced important conversations about mental health, homelessness, and the responsibility of society to protect all its citizens, regardless of their social status. The legacy of Francisco Garcia Escalero's reign of terror continues to cast a long shadow over Madrid's criminal history. Years after his institutionalization, new details emerged about his crimes that painted an even more disturbing picture of his murderous compulsions and the system that failed to stop him. Inside the psychiatric facility where he was confined, Escalero's behavior remained a source of fascination and concern for mental health professionals. He would alternate between periods of apparent lucidity, during which he could articulate complex thoughts about his crimes, and episodes of severe psychosis. During these lucid periods, he provided investigators with additional details about his crimes that had previously gone unreported. Former cellmates and hospital staff reported disturbing conversations with Escalero in which he described additional victims beyond those he had initially confessed to. He spoke of murders committed during blackout periods, victims whose faces he couldn't remember but whose deaths he could recall in vivid detail. These conversations suggested that the official victim count might represent only a fraction of his true toll. Further investigation into Escalero's background revealed a pattern of institutional failures that extended back to his childhood. School records showed numerous instances of violent behavior and psychological disturbance that had been documented but never adequately addressed. Social workers who had encountered him in his youth came forward with accounts of warning signs that had gone unheeded. The impact of Escalero's crimes on Madrid's homeless community proved long-lasting. Many of the city's homeless population developed new survival strategies, traveling in groups and avoiding the areas where Escalero had been known to hunt. Support organizations reported increased difficulty in convincing homeless individuals to accept help or enter shelters, as trust in others had been severely damaged by his crimes. Psychiatric professionals who studied Escalero's case noted unique aspects of his pathology that set him apart from other serial killers. His combination of severe mental illness, substance abuse, and calculated predatory behavior created a complex profile that challenged existing models of criminal psychology. His ability to function within the homeless community, while simultaneously preying upon it, demonstrated a level of social adaptation rarely seen in killers of his type. The investigation into his crimes also revealed disturbing patterns in how society treats its most vulnerable members. Many of Escalero's victims had sought help from various social services before their deaths, but bureaucratic obstacles and limited resources had prevented them from receiving the assistance they needed. Their continued presence on the streets had made them accessible targets for his violence. New forensic techniques, applied years after his crimes, helped investigators better understand his methods and movements. Analysis of crime scene photographs and victim reports revealed patterns in his attack style that had not been previously recognized. This information proved valuable in developing profiles of other predators who target vulnerable populations. The case became a cornerstone study in Spanish criminology programs, used to teach future law enforcement officers about the importance of protecting marginalized populations and recognizing patterns in seemingly unrelated crimes. The failures in the Escalero investigation led to new protocols for handling cases involving homeless victims. Years after his institutionalization, Escalero's mental state continued to deteriorate. He developed new delusions, claiming that his victims' spirits would visit him at night, demanding that he explain his actions. These episodes provided new insights into the relationship between severe mental illness and violent criminal behavior. The impact on the investigators who worked the case left lasting psychological scars. Many reported ongoing trauma from their exposure to the crime scenes and Escalero's graphic confessions. Several sought psychological counseling to deal with the aftermath of the investigation, leading to increased awareness of the mental health needs of law enforcement personnel. Modern analysis of Escalero's case has focused on the intersection of mental illness, substance abuse, and violent behavior. His crimes highlighted the need for better coordination between mental health services, addiction treatment programs, and law enforcement agencies. The case became a catalyst for reforms in how Spain's healthcare system handles patients with concurrent mental illness and substance abuse issues. The story of Francisco Garcia Escalero continues to resonate in discussions about society's treatment of its most vulnerable members. His case serves as a stark reminder of the potential consequences of failing to address mental illness and protect marginalized populations. It stands as a testament to the importance of maintaining vigilance and providing adequate resources for both mental health treatment and the protection of vulnerable communities. Today, the case is studied not only for its horror, but for the lessons it offers about preventing similar crimes. The systemic changes implemented in its wake have helped create better protection for homeless populations and improved coordination between social services agencies. Yet the dark legacy of El Matamendigo serves as a constant reminder that society must remain vigilant in protecting its most vulnerable members from those who would prey upon them.